about the impact of COVID on after-school programs across the US. She's with STEM Next. Welcome, Teresa. Tell us all about STEM Next.
Hi, Tara. Thanks for having me today. This is my first Twitch chat, and I'm excited to be here and talk with you and share a little bit about the work that we're doing. So I'm with an organization called STEM Next Opportunity Fund, and it is the legacy organization of the Noyce Foundation, which was co-founded by Robert Noyce, and he was the co-founder of Intel. And so it's very exciting. It comes from a tech world, and what the Noyce Foundation focused on for so long is building the field of after-school STEM, and building the capacity of the after-school and out-of-school space to provide high-quality STEM learning experiences for young people. So when the Noyce Foundation sunset in 2015, their board was deeply committed still to the cause, and knew that it was really important to keep building this space and giving young people the opportunity to explore and be sparked, and want to experience hands-on STEM and out of school. So they seeded STEM Next Opportunity Fund to continue the legacy. So that is how the STEM Next Opportunity Fund came to be. And what we focus on today is really nationally helping the after school and out of school community build those high quality STEM learning opportunities. And we work with organizations like Technovation to make sure that kids have access and opportunity to those STEM learning experiences.
And Teresa, I think when I first learned about this, I think the scale of your operations is very impressive. So can you tell us a little bit, because I think that's the value of like your high level vantage point of what is happening. So can you tell us a little bit about the network and who do you work with?
So we work with a large scale system-wide networks. Mostly we work with the 50-state after-school network that was originally kind of built by the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. And each state has an after-school network. Together, these networks support over 100,000 programs serving young people in the after school and summer learning space, and it's about 10 million kids. So it's a lot of kids who are in after school. Many of them are in 21st century community learning centers, and these kids who would not otherwise have the opportunity to engage in some really rich academic learning, enrichment programming. So we feel that after school space, there's a lot of hours outside of the school day that kids have to learn, and 80% of their time is spent outside of school. So this is a good opportunity. There's a lot of kids, and they need caring adults who want to bring them good learning activities.
So Teresa, what was COVID like for these 10 million children?
Like every sector, the after-school space has been greatly affected. Not only the educators and the frontline staff who are working in the after-school field, they are feeling the effects of COVID, but the families and kids who attend after-school programs are greatly affected by COVID. But I will say, I'm going to flip this a little bit, because what we've seen in out of school is that the programs have really become a lifeline for many. And that's because they have been able to do this wraparound. While regular and traditional schools closed, the out of school space provided this kind of net to capture that. So they were able to provide childcare for working parents who were those essential workers who we know were early in the fight against COVID, academic tutoring, social and emotional support, partnering with schools to do the hybrid learning, feeding hungry children and families who have been unemployed, and then linking families to other resources. So the after school programs have been in high demand, and they are essential during the pandemic, and now they have continued to be so. So greatly affected, but we've seen after school community really meet this moment. And I could not be more proud of the people who are day in, day out going and putting themselves at risk, and really serving their communities. So it's been inspiring to see, and and tragic too. This whole thing has been so hard on so many.
Yeah, and I think, but I like your view of it, that they were the lifeline, right? Like you can say they were tragically hit, but they met the moment,
Yeah.
and I think one thing that we are learning is that rising to the challenge came at a cost, to the staff, and I think this year maybe funders and other organizations have to think a little bit about how we can
Mhm.
fill that the gap of energy that and sort of lack of resources. So that's why I'm also curious
Yeah.
to do this session where how can the broader community help.
Mhm.
So I think maybe we can go into that, like, what have you seen as being an effective strategy that's working, and what should education organizations and funders think about as we map out our
Mhm.
2021 2022?
So, well, some of what we've seen really working over the last year is this cooperation amongst schools and community programs, after school programs, libraries. I mean, and organizations like Technovation who really come in and are helping not only provide these like rich out of school experiences that kids can tap into online and supporting the families as well, which is critical. But we're looking to have like a holistic kind of approach, and cooperation amongst these different partners. I think has been really, really successful over the last year, and it's something that I think is really important moving forward. So. We need to keep our focus on providing those engaging and high quality learning experiences everywhere. So, in school, out of school, before school, during the summer. I mean, everywhere. There's so much time where we can't miss a moment right now. I think it's really important that we continue to provide relevant, and fun opportunities. And for us, we are working on STEM. Like everything is through a lens of STEM learning. So we have a large initiative, but which I'll tell you a little bit about. But when we think about how young people and people in their community can respond to things like a pandemic, they're wanting to solve problems that are relevant in their community and to the people who they care about. So when you have organizations working together to solve those community problems and you're empowering kids, families, the educators to solve those problems, it's lasting change. And I think through our work that we do with after school networks, and our initiatives, we're trying to create that type of collaborative, systemic approach where we are not allowing young people to fall behind. Basically, I mean, some of the groups that have been the hardest hit from the pandemic. I mean, we're looking at. I mean, every kid's been affected to some degree, but we're greatly affected communities and children of color, children from low income backgrounds, children with disabilities, children who are experiencing homelessness in the juvenile system, foster care, or immigrant families. I mean, these are already communities that have barriers that our system has created that they have to they have to, I guess, you have to attend to these barriers, and that's just not. I mean, that's not fair. So, if we create this holistic system where we're working together and breaking down those barriers, I think we have a good chance of
I
powering
think
through.
I think that's right. Like for the
Mhm.
communities that were already sort of struggling, they've been
Mhm.
pushed down under even more. So Teresa, just to be very, very concrete, like what are
Mhm.
some examples of organizations that are serving students like this that maybe we can think about, like providing more resources, more collaborations,
Mhm.
and sometimes you can overwhelm an organization with a request to help as well. But I'm curious, like, who are some organizations that you guys have been working with, like serving
Mhm.
some of the communities that you mentioned?
Mhm. So we have our large initiative right now is called the Million Girls Moonshot, and it is a large national system approach initiative to empower a million young girls on with an engineering mindset over the next 5 years. And what we think of when I mention an engineering mindset is really about how do you solve those relevant problems, work together, use your existing materials and surroundings, apply your academic learning, use an engineering design process, and work towards meaningful problem solving in a community. So we're working with the after school networks in each state. So those after school networks are plugging into resources, training, partnerships with organizations like Technovation to bring content directly to families and kids, and then they can experience these high quality STEM learning because we know that it works. So what I would say is your after school program in your community, they should be plugging into their after school network that's in each state. The after school networks are trained at, they have deep skill set in building the core competencies of the after school field, and they work closely with the policymakers in their state and at the federal level to ensure that funding goes directly towards after school and out of school programming, and working together with the in school community.
Is this the 50 state after school network, right? Yeah. So
Yep.
I'm just putting in the link over here.
Yep. But
Yeah.
I mean, in the community, it might look like the YMCA or the Boys and Girls Club. It could be the library. It could be, whatever the program that is running the before and after school at the school site. It might be the 21st Century Learning Center. So this is happening in all sorts of um, spaces across the country. But there's a large infrastructure for those organizations to work together, to learn from one another, and to access their resources. So again, it's 10 million kids, 100,000 programs. It's a lot. There's a lot of where we can impact.
So, Teresa, I think for us, last year was such a blur where we were just trying to respond to how things were coming up and trying different things. And now that we're analyzing the impact data and comparing it to previous years, one surprising thing we saw was that the loss in learning was not as much as we had thought,
Mhm.
until we realized that the girls who typically fill out the surveys are the ones who already have access. And so I think Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize winner for
Mhm.
economics, calls it the missing women. And
Mm.
so I use the term missing girls, and these were the girls who are not captured by our data tools at all, because maybe they're registering but they're not filling out any surveys. So our data modalities are not capturing the real problem.
Mhm.
um, and so that to me is a mistake, but it was while we were in it, we were not thinking about it, right?
Mhm.
And so this year and going forward, we're going to put in systems to really try to see where girls are dropping out. So I'm curious, like in hindsight, looking back at 2020, what could you have done better?
That's a really good question. um, I think I think what we could. Well, I think what we could have done better is really not a problem. Not it's not unique to our organization or your organization, Tara. I think it's a problem that we have, well, globally, but I mean, definitely here in the United States, and that's the inequities that exist for all those groups that I talked about who are more greatly affected in the pandemic. They are not, and they have not plugged into these after school summer programs, high quality STEM programming, all the things that we have cared about and put efforts into for many years. They've not been able to plug into those. So I think what we need to do is, we've seen during the last year a greater gap in access, whether it's because they can't get online or young people are isolated, their families are isolated. I mean, we don't know what their home life is always like. So I think what we need to make sure that we do, and this is where we should really be very intentional moving forward, is thinking about those gaps that have been exacerbated because of the pandemic. Who's been left out? Who was left out before? And who is left out still? And we need to create, again, systems that are going to break down those barriers and ensure that everybody has equitable access to high quality STEM learning. They're in programs where they're being cared for, their social and emotional needs are being met, they feel safe, they're not hungry, they have academic enrichment. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we need to make sure that we do with intention, because otherwise the groups that have already been left out, and now more so because of the pandemic, will continue. And that would be, I mean, it's already something that we have to struggle with every day and think about, how do we do our work better and ensure that those kids are not left behind and left out, and create a bigger inequities within our system.
Yeah, I think maybe that's what, like, every organization makes it is beyond sort of the
Mm-hmm.
label of DEI or whatever, but it's like, with a lot of, like, can we make sure that these people, and sometimes it can be overwhelming, like, how can we address all these we're just a STEM education organization.
Yeah,
But how are we supposed to handle hunger and social emotional, but I mean, it's only one child, right? So
yeah,
I think it's overwhelming from an educator's point of view to think about all of these things, but maybe having some clear goals where we say, okay, 10% of our efforts or 20%, because otherwise it's too much to
yeah.
think about.
Our One of the things that we're doing, Tara, in our work with the Million Girls Moonshot is focusing. We've been working with the National Girls Collaborative Project, and we've created this thing. It's called the Equity and Inclusion Framework, and it's really a tool for after school, really any program, but it was designed for after school programs who are doing STEM, to really create and empower educators to have a culturally responsive, equitable, and inclusive learning environment that is not going to inadvertently exclude
Mm.
young people who we need to be engaged, but really make sure that everybody has that sense of belonging, and inclusiveness within the learning space. So our work in the Million Girls Moonshot leads with that lens, and then we bring in from there partners, content partners, technical assistance partners, program partners who, bring the other elements. So it would be like the engineering mindset and ensuring that we're engaging families and role models and mentors and all these things that we know are really good for kids to keep, to build their STEM identity. But again, it all starts with that, changing the narrative and how adults work with young people and create this equitable and inclusive environment. And there are tough conversations to be had for everybody. So it's a lot of work that we all individually need to do about how do we how do we support with intention those groups who have been left out?
And where can we access that framework? I know, like, when you first told me about it, I was struck because it says, "How do we not exclude boys as well?" And
Mm-hmm.
how does your? And I think that's such an important question, right? So where can we access this framework?
So you can go to the milliongirlsmoonshot.org website. I would say first, join the Million Girls Moonshot, because we'll connect you with the after school network in your state. And the after school networks are the ones who have the training and access to all the tools. And then not only do they have access to the framework, but they have access to opportunities to work with groups like Technovation and do workshops around family engagement and other types of capacity building opportunities for any or educator, but especially if you're in the after school or out of school space, it's just a wealth of resources to create this equitable and inclusive learning space focused on empowering, young girls with an engineering mindset, and really how do we create those change makers and innovators and people we know need to be helping us out of our big challenges like the pandemic.
Yeah, and so Teresa, what resources do you think, like, educators and education organizations should be accessing to tackle? I mean, recovery from last year is not going to be quick.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing as being exciting that's coming through?
Well, I think there's a lot of different, there are a lot, there are a lot of people who are focused on the recovery effort right now. This is definitely there's not like one person who's thinking about it. Everybody's thinking about this and everyone's focused on it. So that's good. That's funders, that's policymakers, that's educators, families, everybody's thinking about the same issue. And right now, I think we have this momentum of people who are swimming in the same direction, which is kind of exciting. So right now there is the American Recovery Plan that's on the table. There's a lot of funding that is going to be that the federal government is looking to spend, and we want to make sure that those funds go to after school and out of school summer programming right now, which we know has been such a critical partner during the pandemic and even more so during the recovery. So our partners at the After School Alliance, I would say go to the afterschoolalliance.org, their website, a wealth of information around the recovery plan, how you can get engaged and ensure that funding is going to your state and then going to the programs to provide these essential after school and summer programming for kids. So that's an action.
And I think that's tangible and immediate. Last question, Teresa, what's one of your favorite books that we should be reading so we become better human beings?
So this is one of my favorite questions. I read a lot. So I recently read, I've read several. I've been reading a lot during the pandemic too. So, but I read this book, and this conversation made me think of it. I'm not sure how it makes you a better human being, but I think it makes you think a lot. And it's called The Power by Naomi Alderman. I think it was on President Barack Obama's best book list. But it has a global setting. It's a commentary on power and authority on our contemporary world, but it creates this it definitely makes you question who's in charge, how does power play out, especially for groups that have been disenfranchised. And I think it will make you question how power is attained and how it's activated in our system today. So I don't know if it makes you a better human.
I think that's so interesting.
It's a worthy read.
I'm definitely going to read it. I think, and that's actually the focus for next week's task force meetings, where any kind of complex real world problem, one of the things that I'm trying to create a checklist that educators can use with students. And one of the questions is that I've never thought about, what are the rules of power in this system?
Mm,
Because if you go up to the high level, then and you look at a complex issue like that, even as an issue as recycling, think
mhm.
about what are the rules of power, who's in authority, who stands to benefit. And maybe this is very different from your book, but I've been
No,
thinking about this a lot because I'm like, that puts a whole different frame rather than from a bottom up kind of approach where I need to train people to recycle the plastic separately. It's quite different when you're looking at it from the other side. So I'm totally going to read this book.
it's really good. And it's got a little bit of, I mean, not quite sci-fi. I mean, it's not sci-fi. But it has this element where you see a very big dynamic, a power shift between men and women, and it's just a fascinating read, and it brings up exactly what you're talking about. I mean, you really have the chance to look at where power creates these barriers, and where if it breaks down and if it flips, and there's lots of consequences.
Yeah.
Some are good and some are bad.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's very it's an interesting and worthy read, especially today and today's time, what we've seen over the last 5 years in our country. So I
Yep.
think you enjoy it.
Thank you, Teresa. That was awesome, and I'm a better human being already for this conversation. And yeah, I really look forward to continuing to work. And I want to end by saying, yeah, after school programs are our nation's lifeline, and I think we're so glad to that they stepped in to support our families, right? And
Yeah.
now it's our turn to make sure we fill the gap. So thank you, Teresa. And next week for the Twitch session, we will be talking to Jacqueline Strecker from the United Nations High Commission on Refugees to learn about the impact of COVID on refugee children. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Have a
Thank you.
good weekend.